Birmingham. Events in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. In August 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. called Birmingham, Alabama, quote, "the most thoroughly segregated city in the country," end quote. He did this in his letter for Birmingham jail, which he wrote in response to white religious leaders in the city who were asking for an end to the Birmingham Campaign, led by King and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC. King and the SCLC led the campaign against the violence that was carried out against African Americans in Birmingham in the spring of 1963. The Birmingham Campaign was an effort to take direct action against the segregation of the city by putting pressure on the business owners of Birmingham during the busy Easter season. The campaign was launched on April 3rd with a series of mass meetings, lunch counter sit-ins, and boycott of the businesses in downtown Birmingham. African Americans were expected to participate in this movement through nonviolent direct action. The city was able to get a court order to stop the protests, but King determined that it would be better for him to go to jail rather than stop protesting the, quote, "unjust, undemocratic, and unconstitutional use of the legal process," unquote. On April 12th, King was arrested and kept in solitary confinement, which is when he wrote Letter from Birmingham Jail. He was only released from jail after his wife called President John Kennedy. To turn up the attention on the evils of segregation, the leaders of the campaign encouraged children to become a part of the movement. At the beginning of May, more than 1,000 children tried to march to downtown Birmingham, and hundreds were arrested. Hundreds more returned to march the next day. The chief of police, Eugene Bull Connor, authorized the police and fire departments to use whatever force was necessary to stop the protests from continuing. Whatever force was necessary became pictures and video of children being blasted with high-pressure fire hoses, clubbed by police officers, and attacked by police dogs. These images were splashed all over television and newspapers across the country and around the world. These images triggered outrage around the world and around the country. King encouraged parents, saying that the children were, quote, "doing a job for not only themselves, but for all of America and for all mankind," end quote. Business leaders were surprised when they realized that the protests were having a negative impact on their bottom line. They reluctantly agreed to negotiate with the protesters, and did so only when President Kennedy sent his brother, Robert, the Attorney General, to Birmingham. The business owners wanted to see an end to the protest before they began to work things out. King agreed, and by May 10th, both sides had agreed to a compromise that would eliminate segregated drinking fountains and bathrooms, a plan to desegregate lunch counters, and a release of the protesters from jail, among other things. White segregationists in Birmingham were outraged with the compromise and responded with a series of violent attacks across the city. The last attack was the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church on the morning of Sunday, September 15th. The church was a natural target for groups like the Ku Klux Klan because it was a center for civil rights activities during the Birmingham Campaign. 4 girls were killed in the bombing as they were walking into the church for a sermon on the power of love and forgiveness. Only one man was charged with the bombing, and after his conviction, he received a $100 fine and a 6-month jail sentence for illegally possessing dynamite. It wasn't until 1977 that the same man was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. 2 of his co-conspirators were put on trial and convicted in the early 2000s. The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church convinced many Americans that they had not taken the civil rights movement seriously enough to this point. Newspapers wrote editorials that stated that much of the blood of the girls who had died were on the hands of everyone, not just those who planted the bomb. The future of the civil rights movement was forever changed, as whites now realized that they needed to join with African Americans in order to guarantee the true equality of African Americans.